everyone, good morning. My name is Rachel. Welcome to the virtual Christmas market, and thank you so much for turning up for the first slot today. I think Christmas is my favorite time of the year, and I'm really glad to be here. So my name is Rachel, and I've been doing environmental work for a couple of years now, and I've had the privilege to work with and in a couple of these organizations here. My environmental work actually centers around changing systems with the environment in mind. So my more recent work then hopes to tie in personal leadership development with sustainability. So that's when my team and I actually formed Eco Youth Collective, and we partner with pre-tertiary green groups and individuals to support and mentor them on the projects that they are doing. So today I'm here in my capacity as a volunteer at LepakInSG. So that's our logo. Many of you may know Lepak actually means to chill out or relax in Malay, which is actually a very strange name for an organization. And this is what I had in mind when I think of LepakInSG. We're actually an informal green group. And what we do is we look at the current local environmental scene in Singapore, and we work to fill in any current gaps. So before I begin, I actually feel like I've talked a lot about myself, and I'm curious to find out, for those who are tuning in today, as you're having your breakfast or as you're looking forward to a day of environmental talks and events, how are all you guys doing? Because it's a webinar function, I can't really see who I'm talking to. So I would like to invite you to type in the chat, label it to all panelists and attendees. Let me know how you're feeling or what you're doing. And if there are any questions, you can always pop them over at the Q&A part of the Zoom function. Even though we may not really have that much time to get into it, I'll be sure to try my best to address it as I go along. All right, so today I've been invited as a youth who has worked in the environmental space for about 3 to 4 years now. And I hope to explore 3 things with you guys in the time that we have today. And I want to introduce it to you through the story of a metal straw. So the first chapter that we're going through together is the metal straw actually has been the new symbol of environmental action, right? At the same time, because so many people have then jumped on the trend to buy it, some people actually describe its trend as being more harmful than good. So how can we then make individual environmental action productive and impactful? Second question, I could go to a drink store. I can individually convince everybody in the queue to reject a straw, or I can remove straws altogether from the drink store. So as individuals, how may we see ourselves as part of systems and hence reimagine our environmental influence on a systemic level? Lastly, let's examine a future where every individual has succumbed to a green lifestyle, right? No one uses straws or plastics or waste. Yet it still feels like we're heading towards some sort of climate crisis. Has this environmental issue really been about changing individuals and consumers? Or is there an elephant in the room that perhaps we have not been addressing? So there's still a lot that I'm learning about, and I'm really looking forward to journeying through these 3 chapters with you guys. Elements of today's session will be interactive and call for some audience participation via the chat. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you guys and learning together. And thank you, Annabelle, for sharing how you're doing. Looking forward to hearing more from you guys. So with that, let's go to the first chapter on productive individual action. So actually, I began my environmental work in secondary school. So this is me holding a bunch of metal straws a couple of years ago. And I actually wanted to share the very first initiative that I did that began this entire journey. So I actually noticed that the secondary 1 level camp had single-use plastic containers for their dinner. And I decided to take up the role to ask them to wash their containers with soap at the sink and everything. And I would bring it to recycle so that they wouldn't go to waste. So these are hundreds, 300 containers and covers. And as we laid them out one by one in the room, my teacher comes in and says, actually, I can still see some oil stains on them. And I think they're too oily to be recycled. And then we're like, damn, okay, we'll rewash it. So we find ourselves filling large pails of water and dumping washing detergents in huge amounts so that these containers would be clean enough to be recycled. And as I sat in the corner and watched that, it just hit me that perhaps environmental action wasn't as simple as I thought. Sure, we would be reducing the amount of waste that ended up in incineration plant or the landfill. But in the process, we probably used up a lot of water and whatever ingredients that went into the washing detergent. And then when we finally went to the recycling bin anyways, we noticed there's a smell coming out of it. And it occurred to us that it was contaminated with lots of food waste and even trash. And if we were to put our plastic containers there, chances are it wouldn't be recycled anyways. And I think the difficult part is even when we went back another day to eventually recycle our boxes, we would never really be able to guarantee that we will eventually end up where we wanted it to end up at. So sometimes I think the media rhetoric makes it seem very straightforward. Like all we need are some zero waste essentials. We bring them everywhere we go, and that's perhaps all there is to being an environmentally conscious citizen. But at the same time, making these items also takes up a lot of resources and footprint, especially when they are designed for multiple use instead of single use. So I wanted to look at 3 common reusable items that we see today and share with us some numbers that can help put into perspective what commitment looks like when we purchase one of these items. Okay, so the first one, I think a lot of people ask me, when I buy a metal straw, how many times do I have to use it such that it offsets the environmental impact of creating it, and it's a better alternative than using plastic straws all the way. So if you have a number in mind, you can think about it. And this is actually a table that I got from a Straits Times video. If you're interested, you can search YouTube Straits Times straw. And it looks at the energy needed and the carbon emissions for different kinds of straws that we see in the market today. But if we to plastic straw and a metal straw, you'll realize that a metal straw requires almost 90 times more energy and produces 150 times more carbon emissions than a single plastic straw. So I guess that kind of gives you an idea of how many times you have to use it for it to be worth it. And I think the guess in the chat is quite close. The number is actually 146 times. And I remember seeing that number and being, okay, I think that's achievable. But at the same time, it also has to be done with a lot of intention. Next thing, cotton tote bags. If you want to offset the environmental impact of using cotton tote bags, how many times do we have to use it? So I think a few weeks ago, this article came out in the news on how researchers at NTU actually found that plastic bags can be more eco-friendly than reusable bags in Singapore. And the reason they say this is because during the production process, a lot of water and natural resources are being used. I think it's especially so for cotton because large fields of land are being cleared to grow cotton. And afterwards, the carbon emissions from the transport from place to place then it's also incredibly much to take in. And what's the alternative that they then present is reusable non-woven plastic bags, which look like these. And when I saw this picture, I was like, phew, I actually have some of those at home. And it's a great alternative to use. So thank you for the guesses in the chat. Unfortunately, the answer is 7,000 times. And I was like, whoa, because 7,000 is almost, if I use my cotton tote bag every day, 7,000 times then means 20 years, right? And that's a very, very long time. Okay, so let that sink in. And the final item, our favorite, we all love to drink coffee. And thankfully, this is a multiple choice question. So if I had 3 options for what I wanted to consume my coffee in, which would be the most environmentally friendly? Would you pick the styrofoam cup, the paper cup, or the reusable coffee mug that says "Save the world, it's the only planet that's cats"? Okay, so on the same video, they actually did up this table that compares paper cup and ceramic coffee mug. As you can tell, ceramic coffee mug takes about 12 to 15 times more energy to produce as compared to a paper cup. So that gives you an idea of how many times you want to make sure that you can use your reusable mugs if you were to purchase them. But I think something that's more interesting is looking at styrofoam cup versus a paper cup. And this discussion has been very much talked about in recent years. And this statistics actually coming from a CNA Insider video that you can also find on YouTube. So actually, making a paper cup takes a lot more electricity, water, and fuel as compared to a styrofoam cup. And I think this might come as a surprise to a lot of you guys, especially because paper cups are seen as either like biodegradable or recyclable. So this idea of being recyclable then has a lot of questions that come with it, right? So I thought it might be useful for us to take a look at what the recycling process looks like in Singapore. So what we see often is just this blue bin in a HDB void deck, or maybe it is a recycling bin at the mall. What happens after we place these items inside the blue bin is that a truck comes to pick it up and it's being sent to a materials recycling facility. So it looks a bit like an airport because there's like a conveyor belt, and then they pour out all the items in the blue bin and they lay out, and it kind of moves along while there are people standing on both sides of the conveyor belt. They are taking in specific materials, and then they will pick up what is recyclable and set it aside. So anything else that is not selected on the conveyor belt undergoes the same treatment as any other thing you find in the bin. So they will go to the incinerator plant to be incinerated, and then the ashes will go to the landfill, just like any other piece of trash. So I think a lot of debate recently has been about the contamination of the recycling bins, because it just takes one person's mistake to kind of undo 30 people's effort in recycling. If the recycling bin is full and someone accidentally mistakes it as a trash bin and then pours their bowl of a wonton mee that they never finished inside, that could possibly contaminate the entire bin, which means that on the conveyor belt will not be recycled at all because there are traces of food that are still on it that renders it unrecyclable. Another thing to take note is that because these items are being hand-picked by people who work in the facility, a lot of things also don't get picked along the way, and that makes recycling very tricky. Yeah. So some of you may be feeling this way now. It's like, feels like even the small things can be wrong or damaging. I think many of us buy these reusable items with the intention of using them for our whole lives. But also sometimes we're imperfect, right? We forget to bring, we think it's troublesome to wash, and sometimes they just sit around and collect dust. Or sometimes we make mistakes, right? I always remember the day a few years back when I went to a Starbucks in Bishan, and I was going to use my bubble tea straw to order coffee. And actually it slipped out of my bag, so I bent down to pick it up. And then before I can do that, my metal straw rolls into a drain. And all to my horror, I've only been using it for about 6 months. And to see that happen, I was like, oh wow, oh my gosh. I don't think I used it 46 times. So I've been trying to make up for that by drinking without a straw ever since. So I think rather than seeing these reusable items as the be-all and end-all solution, I think it's just the start of a lifelong journey of being committed to the item that you have bought. Someone once told me that it is a bit like having a pet. Once you buy a metal straw, you pledge to have it with you for the rest of your life as much as you can. So if we're able to recognize that every single object that we own and we buy has kind of story behind it, its materials had to be grown somewhere, the entire process had to be the entire product had to be put together in a long process. I hope we realize that sometimes it is one evil against the other. When we consume, something has to go. We can only do so much in trying to pick the side with less waste. How I see it then is how we can cut down on the things that I need and consume. So instead of buying metal straws, maybe I don't even need a straw in the first place. Instead of buying a cute tote bag to bring around, let's see if there's something around the house that I can already use. There's so many forces in the media and around us that tell us that we always need to buy more, we need to own more, we need to style more, be more. But sometimes actually what we have is already enough for our time. And of course, there are always things that we can't do without. But perhaps we could consider other alternatives like secondhand shopping, taking the things that we already have at home but don't use, or borrowing instead of buying brand new, so we don't have to create more while getting what we need. So with that, let's move on to the next chapter on individuals as part of systems. So as I explored this train of thought, actually I was reminded of this experience a couple of years ago. So when I was in JC, one of the first projects that I did was called Plastic Free July. So we ran around the school holding these like cardboard boards, and we got people to pledge to go without one plastic item for a month. So about 100 or 200 of them signed to go off straws, which was great. And at that point of time, our canteen still serves straws. So we had these posters that reminded people to go straw-free that month as they had pledged. So my friend was telling me this story of something that he witnessed. He was queuing out at a drink store, and then just when it was about to be his turn, the box of straws that had been placed on the countertop then toppled over, and all the straws spilled out on the floor, kind of like water. And in that moment, as he had watched that box of straws being knocked over, he imagined the hours and the time put into convincing each and every one of these individuals not to take the straw. And yet, just in that moment, 100 straws had to be put into the bin. It really got me thinking, instead of spending my time and energy trying to change of 200 people in my school, what if I made sure that that box of straws wasn't even there in the first place? So nobody had that choice to say, oh, maybe I want to use a straw today. Then everyone would be like, her, they'll drink from the cup instead. And I think that really changed my lens from looking at the individual to the system. I think the individual is certainly powerful and we can make a change in ourselves, but we're often constrained within or hindered by the system. If I want to use my own cup for bubble tea, but that means that I get less bubble tea because my bottle is smaller, and that's my loss. At the same time, I think it is only individuals that can change systems. If systems are changed, it is actually very powerful because then other individuals in the system have no choice but to work within them. We are adaptable and we are alive, but systems are the ones that are dead. So if bakeries stop providing bags to put our bread, we will eventually be accustomed to bringing our own lunch boxes to pack bread to school every day. It's kind of just like how bringing a water bottle has become socialized to be a habit. I think everything can be changed. And what's very interesting is when we talk about systems, we think about who holds power for these systems to take place and to change. And with that, I think as individuals, we each hold power for our own systems. So there was once I was talking to a hawker center auntie about why she made the switch from disposables to reusables. She said that there was a customer who had asked her once if she considered doing so, and then followed up with her every single week when she bought her coffee, until the auntie felt like she was comfortable with making the switch. And I thought this was so powerful because huge changes come from little conversations. The conversation with your admin staff about banning disposables at the pantry, conversation with your family that you want a meat-free Monday dinner every week, or going plastic-free for 1 month in a year. From here, I hope to look at environmentalism from another angle. I feel like these days it feels very black and white. Today, I use a plastic box to take away my dinner. So today, I cannot advocate for environmental issues. We see many instances where environmental activists then burn out because they take a lot of effort to do the small things like going vegan, not taking Grab. But then that seems to be beside the point because everyone is in a position to do something larger for their system. We are mothers of families, we are participants of clubs, and perhaps we could take our energy away from policing the small things like plastic, the everyday decisions that we make, and put it into outlets where impact can be created at a much, much larger scale. So I think with that, it's a very nice lead into the last part about whether environmental action is it really just about consumers and individuals. I think when we break down where man-made damage is being done to the environment the most, it seems reasonable to place that on the narrative that it all lies in the hands of citizens and consumers like you and me. So actually, I wanted to play a game with you guys. It's a bit like The Price is Right. So it's a total of 3 aspects I'll be looking at. And I just invite you to take a guess based on the blank and just to try for the fun of it in the chat. So the first one we'll look at is food waste. So I think a lot we have been told in Singapore about waste seems to concern food because we love food, right, by Singapore. A lot talks about how much our households are wasting, how much we can cut back. For example, some say average household actually throws away 52 plates of nasi lemak in 1 year. At the same time, there's a lot of sources of food waste that seem to be swept under the carpet on a retail level, on a business level, on an industrial level, where ugly foods are often being filtered out of the system. So if you could take a guess, how many percentage of food waste do you think comes from households? So if you can take a guess, how many percentage of food waste actually comes from households? Okay, give you some time to think about it. 20, 34, 15. Actually, you are pretty close. Thank you for participating. Given the amount of narrative that is being talked about of food waste in households, I would be surprised to know that actually only 40% of food waste comes from households. It kind of feels like individuals are the one who can take responsibility for the food waste of our nation. But at the same time, even if all households in Singapore only had food waste of one plate of nasi lemak a year, it would still be a substantial amount of food waste from industries and retail that will not be covered by what we do every day. On that similar vein, actually last year, 2019, was the year towards zero waste. And back then, the Ministry of Water and Environment and Water Resources, a lot of their work was focused around changing individual habits. So as you can see from their website, our focus areas, food waste, electronic waste, packaging waste, recycle, right? It seems to overlook the fact that a lot of Singapore's waste comes from a huge range of other sources. We have waste from our industries, waste from construction, waste from buildings and production chains. So similarly, if you could take a guess, how many percent or what is the proportion of Singapore's waste are from domestic sources? So domestic sources include consumer habit, the waste that we generate every day when we go to the market and stuff like that. Okay, 4%, 30%, about there, 20 to 30. Thank you. So what was surprising to me was that the number was actually 1/6. So only 1/6 of Singapore's waste comes from domestic sources, and a huge amount comes from our construction and metal industry actually. But I thought what was very dangerous was that a lot of the narrative that was being given to us about our everyday behavior seemed to place a responsibility on our everyday habits for much of Singapore's waste. But actually, a lot of that is out of our everyday control. Last one, carbon emissions. So since young, I remember very clearly being told when I leave a room I have to turn off the lights, and my aircon has to be 25 degrees or above. And I thought it was a very powerful messaging. If I could get you to guess, how many percent of carbon emissions are actually domestic? So it comes from either our everyday actions, the decisions that we make. 15, 20? I see that the numbers are getting smaller and smaller, which I think is quite interesting. All right. I think perhaps it doesn't cross our mind that perhaps the answer is a one-digit number, which is only 6%, and 6% is less than 10%. A huge majority of our carbon emissions comes from our industry, comes from the power that we give to buildings all over Singapore by electricity and emissions from buildings. So can we really tell a child that switching off lights and fans and their air condition is enough to save the world and to save and reduce the carbon emissions of Singapore? I'm not too sure about that. So with that, I wanted to give a little sidetrack. I promise I'll link it back. So remember the haze? Probably not, because everyone only thinks about COVID-19 these days. But back then, when the haze was something that came up to us every single day, these were the headlines that we were getting. The official narrative seemed to be that people in Singapore were victims of the haze. We were victims of Indonesians who were burning down their forests for economic growth, right? But what was also coming up was that Singapore was also the fifth largest financier of companies that contributed to the haze. This was often the story that wasn't told as much because it really came out to say that actually, no, we're not the victim, but we actively contributed to these companies that led to the haze. I think this is much harder to swallow. And with that, I thought perhaps we could look at the climate crisis a bit differently. Maybe us alone, as individuals, cannot win the battle. It has never just been about consumer behavior. Even if the whole world rejected straws and brought their own cutlery, we could only set back the inevitable by a couple of years or so. sometimes it takes a bit for us to admit that we are not in a position to solve the problem. And perhaps that's the step we need to take to start moving in another direction. I think this also takes the weight of environmental action away from the little things that we do every day into where it really matters. So what shall we do then? I think we hear this a lot, but making our voice heard seems to be increasingly important today, especially when we want to move people who have power over the wider system. So what we did at the Singapore Climate Rally last year was to write into our members of parliament to tell them about various environmental indicators that we wanted Singapore to hit. But it doesn't have to take that form. If your MP just happens to be walking around doing a meet and greet, you can ask them what their stance on the environment is, if any. If you have a friend who is doing corporate social responsibility, maybe you could show a different perspective to environmental action in companies. Instead of giving Tupperware to every single individual in the company, could you all look at something else, like where your money is going as a company, where your investments are? If you'd like to get more involved in the groundwork, you can visit our website or Instagram. And actually, what we do at LepakInSG is we have an environmental events calendar where we compile different things happening across Singapore related to the environment. And what I like about this is that it covers a lot of ground. So whether you're interested in biodiversity or plastic or green jobs or looking at workshops or teach-ins or hands-on activities, you are always bound to find something that you're interested in, either on the website or on Instagram. And that's where you can get connected to what's happening in the current scene and find your place where you can best contribute. Lastly, I also think many people use Instagram these days, and what's helpful for me is to have these pieces of news pop up on my Instagram feed. So I don't have to do anything, but I'm constantly in the loop on what's going on in Singapore and around the world, and keeping myself more and more educated and aware about the issues, so that when it comes out in conversations with my friends on a dinner table, I have things that can contribute. I just realized I didn't even put LepakInSG here, but please follow LepakInSG, as well as all these other accounts that especially do infographics and drawings on to make these environmental news more and more accessible. Screenshot, I can check them out. And with that, thank you so much for listening. I really enjoyed sharing this with you guys. I'm going to stop sharing now. All right, and I'll take a bit of questions from you guys. So thank you for your questions. How to make sure there's no bacteria in using a metal straw? I think more and more recently, straw cleaners have been very much in the market. So you will see it's like a tiny metal stick with like a brush around it. I think a lot of people use that to keep clean. But also that's also an additional resource that you also have to buy if you want to use a metal straw. So that's something to keep in mind. Thank you for your question. Thoughts on Christmas gift shopping and sustainability? How do we do it consciously? I think this is a very individual question, so different people will answer it differently. But what comes to mind, and some practices that I'm trying to do with my friends, is if we do some sort of like gift exchange, I think we would like it to be as effective as possible. So I'm sure we all know in this corner of my house, there's a pile of Christmas gifts that I've received as a child that I don't use at all, like big notebooks, or because I like notebooks without lines. So if people buy me notebooks with lines, I'm very hesitant before I use it. So what we try and do is we have a wish list of the things that we hope to have or hope to not have, right? And on one hand, it might seem quite awkward to have a wish list because it's supposed to be a gift and a surprise. But I think when we are thinking about how do we make sure that the things that we give to others, they actually receive it and use it well, I think this is something that might help. One thing that I also like to tell my friends is to buy me things secondhand. So I'm a huge fan of Carousel, thrift shopping. So when I receive a gift that's secondhand, it really means a lot to me because I know that the person has put in the effort to buy me something that I would feel comfortable receiving. because it's not something new that has to be created for me to receive that gift. Yeah. Thank you. Annabelle asks, the systemic narrative is often about consumer choices and preferences. How are we able to make our desires for sustainability heard when we aren't actively doing it with consumer spending? Are we able to make our desires for sustainability heard when we aren't? Wow, this is quite a complex question because I think even the idea of consumers speaks the loudest about what we stand for. I think a lot of that is being brought into the spotlight as well, because it feels like if a small proportion of their consumer base is concerned with sustainability, that voice isn't even loud enough in the first place for it to change practices that have been ingrained in companies for years and years, right? So I'm personally not an advocate for consumer spending, and where we put our money speaks the loudest for what we believe in. But at the same time, on a personal principle level, I know that I will only support businesses which are aligned with my values as much as I can. How can we make our desires for sustainability heard? I think if you work in customer service or retail, you also may be more familiar with how customer feedback is being processed. For example, how is feedback in your email inquiry base being processed, and how does that affect decisions that are made by the wider management? So I'm personally also still struggling a little bit with this, and how can we make our voices heard in ways that can be effective. But what has been tried and tested in the system is a lot of conversations and emails. I think if I'm at a cafe or a restaurant, if I have the chance to be served by the manager or someone who has more power, I try to start a conversation with them about how consumers are getting more and more concerned with the environment, and this can really, really be one of the forces that either drives people towards them or away from them. And other ways of being heard might include emails, might include calling in, feedback forms, because I think a lot of companies take their feedback seriously. So one thing that I tried to do was that every Wednesday is a random day, I would pick a eatery that I like to go to, and I'll email them either thanking them for their meat-free options or to express a request to have more meat-free options to eat there with my family and friends. And I don't know how effective this is, but I can only do it with the hope that as more people write into them with this request and kind of a promise to say that if you have more meat-free options, I will be there to eat with my family and friends. I think that can be quite powerful. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. It is still, we're still very young into the environmental scene. We're trying different things to see how we can get the big guys to notice. Yeah, and I think we just try, right? And you can slowly see where progress starts, and hopefully that's where domination can begin. Yeah, thank you so much, Annabelle, and thank you everyone for asking your questions. I hope that this session has been insightful for you and interesting. And it's really an honor to be here. I want to thank Delegate and Vanessa for all your hard work. And this is just the beginning of a great 2 days ahead. I'll also be tuning into the other speakers. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you stay on. I think the next talk is at 11. And I hope you all have a great day and Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.